Well, it's finally here, the annual major Windows 11 feature update. This time it's version 24H2, and it is pretty substantial. As usual, it's going to be a staged rollout. It's not going to be immediate for everyone, but you can prioritize yourself to get it if you go into the Windows Update settings and then select get the latest updates as soon as they're available. Though apparently some of the features that are being touted as being in the new update actually were released recently, so you might actually still have a couple of these. I'll try to mention the ones that I noticed when we get to them. First of all, probably the most obvious change is in the context menu. It'll now show little labels next to the cut, copy, and paste symbols. I think that's a welcome change. Next up, here's a feature that I think is possibly the biggest one in years, and that is you can now compress and extract from archives other than zip files. If you right-click a file or folder, you'll see a menu option to compress to, and here at the moment there's 3 options. You can do 7-zip, zip, or tar files, and additional options which we'll look at in a second, but you can actually extract from way more archive types like RAR files. You just can't create as many. But I will point out, I think this actually rolled out in a recent update. You might not have to have 24H2 to get this, so you might have that right now. Anyway, if you do click additional options, you'll see a create archive menu where you can customize even more settings for what kind of archive. For example, there's even more specific archive formats of the tar variety, and even different compression methods you can choose, and compression levels and other stuff like that. Now, if you're like me and you disabled the new context menu and use the old one, you'll notice that there is no compress to option. But I was able to figure out how to add it to the old context menu using a registry tweak. I posted the tweaks on GitHub. If you want, I'll put the link in the description, and basically just download the zip file using this button, and then you can run one of the registry reg files. I made 2 different versions. The full menu one just looks the same with the submenu and stuff like that, or there's the non-full menu version, which just goes immediately to the create archive menu. And to use it, all you do is double click the registry file, hit yes, and then you'll have to restart Windows Explorer, like through the task manager, and then it'll show up. And I also added a couple remove registry files that will undo the things that it added if you want to remove it later. All right, moving on, there's a few changes in File Explorer. These first 2 I think you might actually have access to right now. The first one being you can now right-click tabs and hit duplicate tab, which I think is a welcome change. And you can also now drag files and folders onto the breadcrumb bar, like if you want to move a file up 1 level out of the current folder. And another kind of random change is now in the properties for PNG image files, you can now edit the EXIF metadata of more types. Before, you could really only change the date taken, but now you can edit a lot more, like author, stars, stuff like that you can see. Up next, there's a new thing called Energy Saver, which replaces the previous Battery Saver, though it's kind of similar. They changed the name because now you can use this even if you have a desktop non-battery powered device, or even if you're plugged in. You can just always conserve energy if you want. Next, this is a behind the scenes change, but ARM-based computers running Windows 11 ARM version should see improvements in performance and compatibility thanks to a new translation emulation layer that's called Prism. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry about it. It's just for different CPU types like Snapdragon, or if you run on Mac emulated with M1 Max, stuff like that. And also, it turns out Microsoft is now going to be posting ISOs for the ARM version of Windows soon. Real quick, before we continue, I want to give a shameless plug to my truly hysterical Instagram account. For God's sake, don't go there if you have a heart condition. You'll die of laughter or die of cringing from my attempts at humor. I try to post cool and dumb stuff on there, mostly as stories, but check it out. It's just @TheoJoe over on Instagram. All right, moving on. Another significant feature is Sudo for Windows, or at least for some people. If you've ever used Linux, you basically know what this is. Basically, it lets you escalate the privileges of a specific command in the command prompt. This would need to be enabled in the developer settings. If you don't know what this would be used for or why you would use it, do not enable it. There are potential risks involved in terms of giving bad guys another option if it's configured in certain ways. So if you know what you're doing, it's fine, but if you don't need it, don't enable it. It doesn't add any new special powers or let you run as super admin or anything. It basically just saves you the step of having to open a new admin command prompt window. All right, next up, this one's interesting. Windows 11 now has support for HDR wallpapers. And it seems like at the moment, it's gonna have to be a JXR or JPEG XR file type, which are pretty rare. And you have to have HDR enabled for it to work. Though Microsoft at one point did post a zip file with some sample HDR photos. If you wanna try it out, I'll put a link to that in the description. description. Unfortunately, on Windows, HDR, just in the desktop environment, looks pretty bad in general, or at least in my experience. Though if you do want to try it, one tip is be sure to use the Windows HDR calibration app that Microsoft has in the Microsoft Store, and use that. It'll at least improve it a lot, but still just be aware it's not that great yet. Here's another behind the scenes change that I think is a pretty big deal, and that is Windows is now changing the way that updates are handled, because it's now going to start using what are called checkpoint cumulative updates. Previously, each of the monthly cumulative updates that Windows gets, they would include all the changes and changed files that had changed since the previous major release, not just since the previous update. And this was even for files that maybe hadn't changed since the previous update of the month earlier. So by the end of the year, you'd have a year's worth of update files in the update, so the download sizes would just grow and grow. But now the updates are able to only include the changed stuff from the previous monthly update, so it can be a lot smaller downloads. They should download faster and use less bandwidth. Apparently also it will allow for so-called hot patches, which will not even require restarting Windows some of the times, but that won't be for all of them. All right, the next few we can go through kind of rapid fire. Now Windows will support Wi-Fi 7. I made a whole video talking about why Wi-Fi 7 is a lot better. You can watch that if you want later. Also in the quick settings that pops up from the taskbar, you'll now scroll through these instead of it just being one big panel. So it looks a bit more compact and you can access all the things. Although strangely, you can't remove any of them. Like you can't edit it anymore, which I think is weird because I would like to be able to just remove the energy saver one, for example, because I'm never going to use that on my desktop. Next, another thing to be aware of is for fresh installs of Windows, Bitlocker will be enabled automatically. Not for upgrades, but for new installs, just be aware of that. Next, if you do ever go to install Windows using ISO, so you boot to it, there's a new interface for the installation flow, just looks a bit more modern. For example, you have this thing for, I would like to install Windows 11 or repair my PC. It now looks like this, although you can also go back to the old setup interface if you want. Now, another feature that I saw mentioned, but I couldn't really figure out how to see if it is actually working, is voice clarity. This should be enabled by default. It might just be a background thing, but apparently now microphones and stuff, they'll try to automatically filter out background noise. Looking into it further though, it apparently will only be on certain devices and would show up as a studio effect in the settings, though none of my devices seem to have it. Now, there's also some built-in apps that have been removed. Some of them you might be happy about. For example, finally, Cortana is gone. You could already uninstall Cortana, but now if you update, it'll be automatically removed for you. Also, WordPad has been removed, not to be confused with Notepad. That's still there. WordPad was like a different one not a lot of people knew about. That's gone now, unfortunately. I thought it was pretty neat. And also, Windows Mixed Reality has been removed. That was for like virtual reality headsets if you wanted to have like a desktop environment. It never really caught on. So if you use mixed reality, you might not want to upgrade. Finally, here's a bunch of random little changes. Some of them are cool. Task Manager now has a new icon. You can look at the difference of the before and after. Also, behind the scenes, the Windows kernel now has parts of it written in Rust. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, but possibly Windows might be more stable in general going forward as they add more stuff like that. Also, Windows now supports SHA-3 hashing algorithms, although I think that might have been added a while ago too, I'm not really sure. Windows now also supports Emoji 15.1, the latest one. That has a few new emojis like the shaking head, up and down ones. Here's another one that not many people are talking about. Now, if you go to the properties of any file, you'll now see the digital signatures tab for all files, even for ones that aren't signed, and also it'll now show cabinet type signatures. I'm not gonna get into what that means, just realize there were some types of signatures that weren't showing up before, but now they do. I did also make a whole video about that I can put a link to if you want to watch it afterwards. And here's a cool little new feature in the registry editor, actually. You can now search within a specific subtree, so you don't have to search the entire registry for stuff if you don't want. There's just this new checkbox you can see that comes up in the search box. And another change that might have already been rolled out, the lock account button has now been moved to the power button along with shutdown and restart. And also the account switcher thing looks a bit different. You can no longer quickly switch between account types like you could before. I guess you have to go back to the lock screen to do that now. So I think that pretty much covers it. Let me know down in the comments which of these is your favorite, or if I missed any big ones, definitely let me know, and also check down there because someone probably did mention one that I did miss. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a big giant thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. And again, consider checking out my Instagram. It's just @TheoJoe. If you want to keep watching, I'll put a couple links here to the videos I mentioned talking about Wi-Fi 7 and then that cabinet signatures thing. You can just click on either of those right there. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.